"Give it back." "No." I said, "Give it back." And I said, "Earn it." The restaurant fell into a silence so heavy that even the kitchen stopped clattering. Every eye shifted toward the man in the tailored black suit. His bodyguards had already formed a wall around him, waiting for a single command. Instead, he remained perfectly still. Across from him stood a plus-size woman in an ordinary sweater, her arms folded as if she were arguing with an impatient customer instead of the most feared mafia boss in the city. She didn't flinch when one guard stepped closer. "You're about to make the biggest mistake of your life." She looked past him and fixed her eyes on the man everyone else feared. "Your men took my waiter's tip. Tell them to give it back. Then apologize." The room braced for violence. Instead, the ruthless mafia boss smiled, not because she had challenged him, but because she had just rejected him for the 7th time, without realizing she was the only woman he had spent years searching for. For several long seconds, nobody in the restaurant moved. The waiter whose tip had started the argument stood frozen beside the register, still clutching an empty serving tray. His face had gone pale. Every instinct told him to apologize, return the money, and pretend none of this had happened. Instead, the woman standing between him and the city's most feared mafia boss refused to take a single step back. The bodyguards waited for their employer's signal. It never came. The man in the black suit slowly lowered his gaze to the folded bills resting in one of his guards' hands. Without raising his voice, he spoke. "Give it back." The guard hesitated. "But, boss." "I wasn't asking." The money was immediately returned to the stunned waiter. The woman watched without smiling. "That isn't everything." One of the guards scoffed. "What else do you want?" She answered with the same calm expression she had worn since the argument began. "An apology." The restaurant collectively inhaled. The guard looked at his boss, as if hoping he had misheard. The mafia boss remained silent for several seconds before speaking again. "She is right." The words landed like thunder. "You took something that wasn't yours." The guard's confidence vanished. He reluctantly turned toward the young waiter. "I'm sorry." The apology was quiet, awkward, and obviously forced. Still, it was enough for the woman. She nodded once. "Good." Then she picked up her purse and walked toward the exit without another glance. She didn't ask for a reward. She didn't ask for money. She didn't even look back at the man everyone else feared. Only after the restaurant door closed behind her did people begin breathing again. Outside, cold evening air swept across the sidewalk. The woman, whose name was Clara Bennett, pulled her light jacket tighter around herself and started the familiar walk toward her apartment. She worked as an accountant for a small non-profit organization a few blocks away. Her life followed the same routine almost every day. Work, dinner at the neighborhood restaurant, a short walk home, books before bed. There was nothing extraordinary about her life, and she preferred it that way. She had no idea that, inside the restaurant behind her, the city's criminal empire had just witnessed something none of them thought possible. Their boss had lost an argument and seemed strangely pleased about it. At a corner table, the bodyguards exchanged confused glances. No one dared speak first. Finally, the youngest among them cleared his throat. "Boss." The mafia leader continued sipping his untouched coffee. "Yes?" "Should we investigate her?" He looked toward the restaurant door where Clara had disappeared. "No." Another guard frowned. "Then, should we make sure she never bothers you again?" The answer came instantly. "No." The guards looked even more confused. After years of working for him, they knew exactly how he dealt with people who publicly challenged him. This was not it. Not even close. Instead, for the first time any of them could remember, their boss smiled. A genuine smile. So she's still like that. No one understood what he meant. The following afternoon, The lunch crowd filled the restaurant again. The waiters whispered nervously every time the front door opened. Rumors had spread overnight. Some believed the Mafia Boss would return to reclaim his reputation. Others feared the restaurant would be destroyed, simply because someone had embarrassed him. Even Clara wondered if perhaps she had gone too far. She wasn't afraid of powerful people. She simply disliked bullies. Still, she admitted to herself that confronting armed men had probably been the most reckless decision of her life. She pushed the thought away and opened the accounting files she often reviewed during lunch. The bell above the entrance rang. Conversation stopped instantly. The Mafia Boss walked in alone. No bodyguards. No expensive entourage. No threats. Just him. Every employee stiffened. He ignored the empty VIP table and instead walked directly toward Clara. She looked up from her paperwork without panic. "You again." He placed a thick white envelope on the table. The waiter deserved this. She glanced at it, but didn't touch it. What's inside? Enough to replace every tip he has ever lost. Several nearby customers leaned closer, pretending not to listen. Clara slowly pushed the envelope back across the table. No. For the first time, the Mafia Boss looked surprised. No? He deserves your apology. A quiet laugh escaped someone in the kitchen before immediately stopping. The entire restaurant waited. Again. The Mafia Boss studied Clara for several seconds. She wasn't trying to embarrass him. She wasn't negotiating. She simply believed money could not replace respect. Finally, he turned toward the young waiter. The waiter nearly dropped the plates he was carrying. The Mafia Boss straightened his jacket. Then, in a voice loud enough for every person in the restaurant to hear, he said, "I owe you an apology." The waiter stared at him in disbelief. "My men abused my name. They disrespected your work. And because of that, I'm sorry." Silence swept through the room. Even the cooks had stopped moving. No one in the city had ever heard those words come from him. Not to a politician. Not to a rival. Certainly not to an ordinary waiter. Clara finally nodded. Now he deserves the envelope. She slid it toward the stunned waiter. "This time, it's yours." The young man accepted it with trembling hands. As Clara returned to her lunch, she spoke without looking up. "Thank you." The Mafia Boss stood there a moment longer. There was no victory in his expression. Only quiet admiration. For the second day in a row, the only woman who had ever dared correct him in public had done something far more dangerous. She had reminded him that respect could never be bought, only earned. News traveled faster than anyone expected. Within 3 days, nearly every employee in the restaurant knew the story. Not because the Mafia Boss had threatened someone, not because another rival had disappeared, but because he had apologized to a waiter. The story sounded so unbelievable that people laughed the first time they heard it, until someone showed them the restaurant's security footage. After that, nobody laughed anymore. Clara hoped the strange encounter was over. She returned to her quiet routine, convinced the city's most powerful man had simply corrected a mistake and moved on. She couldn't have been more wrong. The following Tuesday, she left work just after 5. As she stepped outside the non-profit office, a sleek black sedan waited across the street. Its windows slowly rolled down. The Mafia Boss looked at her with the same calm expression as before. "Good evening," she sighed. "You've memorized my schedule. I noticed a pattern. That's another way of saying yes." He almost smiled. "I'd like to invite you to dinner." Clara glanced toward the small diner she visited every Tuesday. "I'm already having dinner. I could join you. I like eating in silence." He nodded once. "I'll try again another day." The car drove away. She stood there for a moment. That had been unexpectedly polite. 2 days later, she stopped at her favorite neighborhood cafe before work. She had barely reached the counter when a familiar voice spoke behind her.
Coffee?
She closed her eyes for one brief second before turning around. "You've got remarkable timing. I was hoping you'd say yes." She accepted the paper cup he offered, then handed it back unopened. "I've already had one. It isn't for now. I don't collect spare coffees." The barista bit her lip, trying not to laugh. The Mafia Boss accepted the rejection without complaint. "I understand." As Clara walked away, the barista whispered, "He's kind of handsome." Clara answered without slowing down, "So are golden retrievers." His bodyguards, however, were having a much harder time understanding the situation. Inside the black sedan parked across the street, 4 heavily armed men watched their boss walk back toward the car, carrying 2 untouched coffees. One finally broke the silence. Rejected again. Another checked his watch. 43 seconds. The oldest guard shook his head. New record. Their boss climbed into the passenger seat. No one dared look directly at him. Then he calmly picked up one of the coffees. "Anyone want this?" All 4 guards exchanged confused looks. The youngest finally raised his hand. "I'll take it." Their boss passed him the cup. No reason to waste good coffee. The guards silently stared at one another. Years of protecting one of the world's most intimidating men had prepared them for gunfights, political negotiations, even betrayals. Nothing had prepared them for watching their boss become the nicest rejected man in the city. A week later, Clara visited the public library after work. It was her favorite place whenever life became noisy. She settled into a quiet corner with a history book. Exactly 18 minutes later, someone sat across from her. She didn't even bother looking up. "You're getting predictable." The Mafia Boss lowered his voice. "I enjoy history." "No. You enjoy following me." A librarian immediately appeared. "Sir, this is a quiet floor." He nodded politely. "My apologies." For the next 15 minutes, he read a book without saying another word. When Clara packed her things to leave, he stood as well. "I've learned something." She raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "You really do like silence. I've been trying to tell you." I finally listened. For the first time. She almost smiled. Almost. By now, the bodyguards had invented a game. Every morning they guessed how quickly their boss would be rejected. Breakfast invitation? 30 seconds. Too optimistic. I say 15. No. Today he'll ask about a movie. Another guard laughed. She'll reject him before he finishes the sentence. Late that afternoon, they received their answer. The Mafia Boss approached Clara outside a bookstore. "There's a new movie tonight." She adjusted the stack of books in her arms. "I already know the ending. It was released yesterday. I read spoilers." The guards burst into laughter the moment their boss returned to the car. Even he couldn't stop himself from smiling. "I walked right into that one." The oldest guard shook his head. "I've protected you for 12 years. I've never seen anyone defeat you with complete sentences." Despite everything, Clara couldn't deny one thing. He never tried to impress her with money. He never threatened anyone. He never used his influence to force conversations. Whenever she said no, he simply accepted it. That confused her more than anything else. One rainy evening, she found him standing outside the restaurant without an umbrella. He looked up as she approached. "I wasn't expecting rain." She opened her umbrella. "That makes 2 of us." For several quiet seconds, they stood beneath the same shelter, while traffic splashed through puddles nearby. Finally, she spoke. "You know this isn't working." "I know. You've asked me out 7 times. I counted. And," he looked toward the rain-covered street, "I've also learned 7 things about you." She frowned. "I wasn't trying to teach you." "I know. Another comfortable silence settled between them. Before walking away, Clara paused. "You should stop." "Why?" "Because eventually you'll get tired of hearing no." He smiled gently. "I don't think that's what I'm searching for." Before she could ask what he meant, a black sedan pulled to the curb. His bodyguards opened the door. He stepped inside without another word. As the car disappeared into the rain, Clara remained standing beneath her umbrella. Something about that conversation lingered in her thoughts. It wasn't persistence that unsettled her. It wasn't his reputation. It was the strange feeling that every rejection somehow mattered to him, as if he wasn't trying to win an argument, as if he had been waiting years simply for the chance to hear her voice again. She had no idea why. And somewhere across the city, the Mafia Boss quietly looked out the rain-streaked window. Tomorrow, someone would finally ask him the question everyone else had been wondering. Why her? By the end of the second week, the story had spread far beyond the restaurant. People weren't talking about violence anymore. They were talking about something far more unbelievable. The ruthless Mafia Boss had been rejected 7 times, and somehow he kept coming back. Late one evening, the lights in the top floor of Blackwood Tower were still on. The city's most influential businessmen had already gone home. Only one office remained occupied. The Mafia Boss stood silently beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. His oldest friend, Victor Hale, poured 2 glasses of whiskey before sliding one across the desk. "You've been distracted." No answer. Victor sat down. "You cancelled 3 meetings." Silence. "You ignored a governor's phone call." Still nothing. Finally, Victor leaned back and smiled. "I've known you for almost 20 years. You've negotiated with killers. You've stared down politicians. You've survived betrayals. But one woman tells you no. And suddenly you don't know what to do." A quiet laugh escaped the Mafia Boss. Victor froze. "I knew it. I haven't heard you laugh since." He stopped himself. The Mafia Boss picked up the glass, but never drank. Victor asked the question everyone else had been whispering. Why her? The room fell silent. For several moments, the only sound was rain tapping gently against the windows. Then, without taking his eyes off the city below, the Mafia Boss finally spoke. "Because she doesn't remember me." 15 years earlier, there had been no luxury office, no expensive suit, no bodyguards. His name had meant nothing. At 19, he worked double shifts in a small downtown diner while trying to survive another month. During the day, he carried plates. At night, he studied business books borrowed from the public library because he couldn't afford to buy them. Every dollar mattered, especially the tips. One rainy Friday evening, the restaurant overflowed with customers. He rushed between tables carrying coffee, burgers, and receipts while trying not to fall behind. Near closing time, an elegantly dressed businessman finished his meal. The young waiter smiled politely. "Thank you for coming, sir." The customer placed a $20 bill on the table. Before the waiter could collect it, another wealthy guest from the neighboring table casually reached over, picked up the bill, folded it into his wallet, and stood to leave. The young waiter blinked in confusion. "Excuse me, I think that tip belongs to me." The man barely slowed, "Then work harder next time." The restaurant heard the exchange. Nobody moved. The owner lowered his head. Several customers pretended not to notice. No one wanted trouble with a rich and influential man. The young waiter stood there, embarrassed, humiliated, helpless. Then, a chair scraped loudly across the floor. A young woman stood up. She wasn't dressed elegantly. She wasn't famous. She wasn't important. She simply looked furious. "Put it back." The wealthy man laughed. "Mind your own business." She crossed the room without hesitation. "It became my business the moment you stole from someone. You can't steal your own money. It stopped being yours the second you left it on his table. The man rolled his eyes. It's only $20. The young woman folded her arms. No, it's $20. And his dignity. The restaurant became silent. The argument lasted nearly 10 minutes. The businessman threatened lawyers. She quoted basic decency. He mocked the waiter. She defended honest work. Finally, tired of the growing attention, the man threw the bill onto the floor before storming out. The young waiter quickly bent down to pick it up. Before he could thank her, she smiled warmly. Respect isn't expensive. She looked around the restaurant. Cowardice is. Then she grabbed her backpack and disappeared into the rain. She never asked for thanks, never introduced herself, never looked back. But he never forgot her. Victor slowly lowered his glass. I had no idea. You weren't supposed to. You searched for her, for years, without knowing her name. The Mafia boss nodded. I remembered her face. I remembered her voice. I remembered one sentence. Victor looked stunned. How did you finally find her? The answer made him smile. I wasn't looking for her. I was arguing with her. He remembered that afternoon perfectly. The moment she demanded the stolen tip be returned, the way she folded her arms, the way she refused to be intimidated, even the rhythm of her voice. Nothing had changed, except she didn't recognize him, not even slightly. Victor frowned. You could have told her. I almost did. Why didn't you? The Mafia boss smiled faintly. Because I wanted her to choose me, not a memory. Across the city, Clara sat in her apartment reading. Or at least, trying to. She had read the same paragraph 6 times without understanding a single sentence. Her thoughts kept returning to the strange man who accepted rejection with surprising grace. Something felt familiar. Not his face, not his voice, just the feeling. She couldn't explain it. At one point, she closed the book and walked toward the kitchen. As she reached for a mug, her eyes landed on an old cardboard box tucked above the refrigerator. It contained photographs from college, movie tickets, receipts, random memories she had never organized. Almost without thinking, she pulled it down. One by one, she flipped through faded photographs. Birthday parties, volunteer events, old classmates. Then, a folded receipt slipped from between 2 pictures. She opened it. On the back, written in hurried blue ink, were 5 words she barely remembered writing years ago. Respect isn't expensive, ever. She frowned. Where had that come from? She couldn't remember. Not yet. She smiled to herself anyway. Apparently, she had always been stubborn. Outside her apartment building, a familiar black sedan rolled quietly past, before continuing down the street. Inside, the Mafia boss glanced once toward her lit window. He could have knocked. He could have explained everything. He could have told her she had unknowingly changed the course of his life 15 years ago. Instead, he asked the driver to keep going. Some truths were worth waiting for, especially when the person hearing them had forgotten they ever happened, and somewhere deep inside. He hoped that when she finally remembered, her answer to the 8th invitation might be different. 3 days after Clara found the old receipt, a handwritten invitation arrived at her apartment. No gold lettering. No family crest. No expensive perfume. Just a simple cream-colored envelope. Inside was a single card. Charity Gala for St. Gabriel Children's Hospital. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, was one sentence. I hope you'll come. No expectations. Just one evening. There was no signature. There didn't need to be. Clara stared at the card for nearly a minute before placing it on the kitchen table. She almost threw it away. Instead, she found herself wondering why someone who commanded so much power kept asking instead of demanding. That question alone convinced her to attend. Not for him, for an answer. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. Politicians mingled with business executives. Celebrities posed for photographers. Members of the city's wealthiest families exchanged polite smiles that rarely reached their eyes. When Clara stepped through the entrance in a simple navy blue dress, several conversations paused. She wasn't wearing designer jewelry. She wasn't accompanied by security. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply looked comfortable being herself. Across the room, the Mafia Boss noticed her immediately. For the first time all evening, his expression softened. He crossed the ballroom without haste. "I'm glad you came." She looked around the lavish room. "I came for the fundraiser. I hoped that might be the reason." She almost smiled. "You're getting better at realistic expectations." "I've had 7 opportunities to practice." Before she could answer, another voice interrupted. "So," a woman in an elegant silver gown stepped forward, champagne glass in hand. "This is the famous waitress defender." Several nearby guests chuckled quietly. Clara calmly corrected her. "Accountant." The woman ignored the correction. "I expected someone." Her eyes slowly scanned Clara from head to toe. A little more impressive. The room grew noticeably quieter. The Mafia Boss turned toward the woman. His voice became colder. "Enough." She looked surprised. "I'm only making conversation." "No. You are trying to make someone feel smaller." The woman forced a smile. "I'm thinking about the family's reputation." Another man joined the conversation. "Our organization has traditions. A future wife should reflect strength." Someone else added, "She doesn't belong in this world." A fourth voice followed. "She isn't elegant enough." Another, "She doesn't fit the image." Finally, the cruelest whisper drifted across the room. "She's overweight." Silence spread through the ballroom. Several guests looked away. Others waited to see how the Mafia Boss would respond. He slowly turned toward Clara. His jaw tightened. "Would you like me to answer them?" She looked at him for several quiet seconds. Then, she smiled. "No." He searched her face. "Are you sure?" "I've been answering people like this my whole life." She gently stepped forward until she stood facing the group alone. There was no anger in her voice, only calm certainty. "I've heard every version of those comments since I was 16. Nobody interrupted. "I've been told to lose weight before applying for promotions." She looked toward another guest. "I've been told I'd be prettier if I smiled less." Another, "I've been told confidence only looks attractive on certain body types." She paused. "And yet, I'm still here." The ballroom remained perfectly silent. She wasn't defending herself. She was simply telling the truth. One of the older businessmen folded his arms. "So you think you're good enough for this family?" Clara shook her head. "No." The answer caught everyone off guard. "I never said that." She glanced around the room. "I'm not trying to join your family." She looked directly at the woman in silver. "I'm not competing with you." Then, at the businessmen. "I'm not asking for your approval." Finally, she looked at the Mafia Boss. "I'm simply refusing to become someone I'm not." The words settled over the ballroom with astonishing weight. She continued, "If being accepted requires pretending to be someone else, then rejection is a much better bargain." No one spoke. No one laughed, because there was nothing left to mock. Every insult they had prepared suddenly sounded childish. Across the room, several charity volunteers quietly began applauding. One pair of hands, then another. Within seconds, dozens of guests joined them. Not loudly, respectfully. The applause wasn't for beauty. It wasn't for courage alone. It was for authenticity. The Mafia Boss watched Clara with quiet admiration. "Years ago," She had defended a stranger who couldn't defend himself. Tonight, she defended herself without asking anyone to rescue her. He realized something that caught even him by surprise. He hadn't fallen in love with a woman who challenged powerful people. He had fallen in love with a woman who refused to surrender her own dignity. There was a difference, and it mattered. The applause eventually faded. The woman in silver quietly lowered her eyes. One by one, the critics drifted away, unable to recover the confidence they had carried into the conversation. Victor, standing near the stage, walked over, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. I finally understand. The Mafia Boss accepted one. Understand what? Victor smiled. You never wanted someone to stand beside your power. You wanted someone who could stand without it. The Mafia Boss looked toward Clara, who was now laughing with a group of hospital volunteers, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. He nodded once. Exactly. Later that evening, the charity auction ended. Guests slowly began leaving. Outside the ballroom, cool night air replaced the warmth of the crowded hall. Clara stood on the front steps waiting for a taxi. The Mafia Boss approached, keeping a respectful distance. They were wrong. She looked toward the street. I know. I'm sorry you had to hear that. She shrugged gently. If I carried every cruel opinion people ever had about me, I'd never have enough room to carry my own. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, a taxi pulled to the curb. Before Clara climbed inside, she turned back. You know, he waited. This is the first evening you didn't ask me to dinner. He smiled. I was listening. She nodded once. Good. The taxi pulled away. As its taillights disappeared into the city traffic, the Mafia Boss remained standing on the sidewalk. He wasn't disappointed. For the first time since finding her again, he wasn't chasing her. He was learning her, and somewhere deep inside, he sensed that the 8th answer would never come from persistence alone. It would come when she believed the man standing before her was no longer defined by power, but by the person he had chosen to become. A week passed after the charity gala. For the first time in nearly a month, Clara didn't see the Mafia Boss. No black sedan across the street, no coffee waiting outside her office, no unexpected conversations in bookstores. Nothing. At first, she barely noticed. Then, she found herself looking toward the restaurant door each evening, before realizing she had been expecting someone. The realization made her laugh at herself. He finally listened. Oddly enough, the silence felt louder than all 7 invitations. Meanwhile, inside Blackwood Tower, Victor watched his old friend sign documents with unusual focus. You've stopped chasing her. The Mafia Boss nodded. I said I was listening. Victor smiled. And now, I wait. For what? For the first decision she makes that isn't influenced by my reputation. Victor raised an eyebrow. You really think she'll come? The answer was calm. If she doesn't, I'll still be grateful I found her. 3 days later, Clara finished work later than usual. As she walked toward the subway station, she noticed a familiar neighborhood diner. Not the restaurant where they first argued. A different one. Through the window, she spotted someone wearing a rolled-up apron, carrying plates between crowded tables. She stopped walking. The Mafia Boss. No tailored jacket. No security. No expensive watch. Just a plain black shirt with his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He laughed politely as an elderly couple thanked him for refilling their coffee. Curious, Clara stepped inside. He noticed her immediately. There was surprise in his eyes, not calculation. You came. She glanced around. I thought you owned half the city. I do. So, she looked at the tray in his hands. Why are you working here? The owner of the diner overheard the conversation and smiled. He volunteers every Thursday. Clara looked back at him. "You never mentioned that. You never asked." The elderly owner continued arranging pastries behind the counter. 15 years ago, this young man worked here. He comes back every month to help during our busiest dinner service. He says it reminds him where he started. Clara stood perfectly still. A memory flickered. Rain. A crowded restaurant. A frightened young waiter. A $20 tip. A sentence. Respect isn't expensive. Cowardice is. Her breathing slowed. She looked carefully at his face. Not the confident man standing before her. The young waiter hidden beneath years of experience. Suddenly, she remembered. Not everything. Just enough. It was you. He didn't pretend not to understand. Yes. The waiter. He nodded. I never thanked you. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Clara laughed softly. I honestly forgot. I know. I didn't even remember your face. I know. She shook her head in disbelief. And you've been searching all these years. Because of one argument? He smiled. It wasn't the argument. It was the person willing to have it. After closing time, they walked slowly through the quiet streets. For the first time, there was no awkwardness. No rehearsed invitations. No clever excuses. Only honesty. When they reached the small park near her apartment, he stopped beneath a row of old maple trees. I've asked you 7 times. I remember. I'm not going to ask you to marry me. She folded her arms, pretending to look relieved. Good. I wasn't ready to reject you an 8th time. He laughed. So, let me ask something harder. She tilted her head. What could possibly be harder than marriage? He looked directly into her eyes. Keep arguing with me. She blinked. What? For the rest of our lives. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead. You've corrected me, challenged me, embarrassed me, and reminded me who I wanted to become. He took one slow breath. Every time you said no, I walked away a slightly better man. I don't want someone who always agrees with me. I want the woman who would tell me I'm wrong in front of an entire restaurant if I ever deserved it. Clara stared at him. Then she laughed. Not politely, not nervously. The kind of laugh that arrived without permission. That, she wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Has to be the strangest proposal I've ever heard. I've never proposed before. It shows. They both laughed. The silence that followed felt comfortable, warm, real. Finally, she stepped closer. Much closer than she ever had before. She reached for his hand. This time, she didn't pull away. I still don't care how powerful you are. I know. I'll still argue with you. I hope so. I'll still tell you when you're being impossible. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. She smiled. Fine. He waited. But I'm still keeping the tip. For one brief second, he looked confused. Then he remembered. The restaurant. The waiter. The beginning of everything. He laughed louder than he had in years. Deal. Months later, customers at the neighborhood restaurant still loved telling the story. Some insisted the city's most feared mafia boss had been defeated. Others claimed the plus-size accountant had somehow tamed the most powerful man in town. Both versions missed the truth. He had never been searching for someone to obey him. She had never been trying to change him. What brought them together wasn't power, or beauty, or destiny. It was a simple belief that dignity should never depend on status. Years earlier, one fearless stranger had defended a young waiter because it was the right thing to do. Years later, that same kindness found its way back to her. Not as a debt to be repaid, but as a love built on respect, laughter, and the courage to tell each other the truth. And whenever friends asked Clara what had finally changed her mind, after rejecting him 7 times. She always smiled before giving the same answer. I never said yes to a mafia boss. I said yes to the waiter who never forgot to say thank you.